Hey everyone. So I mentioned to a Web2 gaming entrepreneur last night that we're doing a panel on Web3 gaming sustainability. And he said, wow, that'll be a short panel. It's certainly been a wild year for crypto gaming, especially all things considered what we've seen this year. That being said, I strongly believe this is an important and substantial domain. So I'm thrilled to be joined on stage here by gaming veterans spanning the Web2 and Web3 worlds. So we'll have Aaron from Laguna Games, Alex from MAVIS, Hilmar from CCP, as well as Ben from BLOCKADE Games. So welcome all. Let's start with intros. Can each of you mention a bit about your companies and missions? We'll start with you, Aaron.
Sure. Hi all. I'm Aaron Bauerschmidt. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Laguna Games. We're the creators of Crypto Unicorns, a wacky, wild unicorn farming and battle game that is one of the top titles on the Polygon sidechain.
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Aleksander, one of the co-founders of MAVIS and Axie Infinity. I guess I'll leave it a little bit short there. I guess a lot of people know us for Axie. Of course, what we do now is not only Axie, we're making also a platform that we are enabling for other game developers as well, who want to deploy blockchain games without making all the mistakes that we made along the way.
I'm Hilmar Pétursson. I'm the CEO of CCP. CCP was founded 25 years ago in Iceland to make persistent world games. Our core purpose is to make virtual worlds more meaningful than real life, which sounds a bit dystopic, I know, but it is informed by a lot of the experiments we've been doing on EVE Online, which is our most known game. It's been running from 2003. It's going to have its 20-year anniversary next May. And that has taught us many things about economies, governance, development, etc., which keep us very engaged in trying to share that with the world as we learn about it in runtime ourselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Ben. I'm the CTO and co-founder of BLOCKADE Games. We founded BLOCKADE in 2018. We are building Neon District, and we also made a game called Plasma Bears. I'm also the technical co-founder and the author of the smart contracts for cyber brokers.
Great, thank you. So looking back to 2021, we saw incredible growth in user funds going to the ecosystem, adoption of Web3 gaming. Fast forward to today, we've been fighting a very tough bear market. What do you think we got right? What did we get wrong in this period? Maybe we'll start with you, Alex.
Yeah, I get this question quite a lot. And what I think we found product market fit with is more so on the economy side, or, well, probably to no surprise, people want to find a way to make money when they're playing games. I think that's pretty clear. And they want to do something meaningful inside these games. But probably the quality of the games were lacking a little bit. So I think that's clear, and that the economies also weren't necessarily ready for all the users that discover them. So what I've kind of come to the conclusion is that a lot of what we're doing here is very early on experiments to try systems, and then they're getting pushed to the max. So one very classic example is that when you're creating game economies, you try to model out, what are the inflows and what are the kind of outflows. But when economies are open and there's a lot of exogenous capital, basically money that can flow in from exchanges, for example, into your closed system, then all bets are off, right? So you can get speculators that drive up insane prices, which then again create very high levels of expectations from player bases, which then again can lead to some bad outcomes. So a lot of learnings to be done, and I think now we're getting to the point of a more like healthy and sustainable economies, right? Which is why we're here to talk about today.
That makes sense. Hilmar, looking outside in into this world, do you think there's something inherently hard around building sustainable economies in Web3? How would you assess this space?
Building sustainable economies is just hard, period. Web3 doesn't really make it any easier. It doesn't make it harder. Maybe I think there are aspects of, frankly, limitations of blockchains more than the enabling features of blockchains, which make it harder. I at some point started to go to blockchain game conferences, where I met many of the people here, because the design space is so constrained that it brings a clarity of thought, which I found more interesting than going to kind of gaming economy conferences. So I don't think it really makes it harder per se. They're just harder. We watch our countries struggle with running sustainable economies. We watch Web2 games, problems running sustainable economies. It's just super hard. Where it is extra hard with games is that we have agency when we create games, which is not the same agency as our governments have. And even though governments struggle with their agency, they're cheating all the time. But we have godlike power inside our creations, which often creates an intellectual rigor problem, where like, when are we acting like God? When are we acting like government? When are we acting like a central bank? When are we acting like equipment manufacturers, etc. So there's a big stack of things that need to be organized. It has taken us, with EVE Online, a long time to figure out where are the layers of how you build up an economy. And there are skill sets which are distributed throughout the stack, which not everyone is staffed for. When you start at the base layer, it's the operation domain of physicists, then you need ecologists, then you need economists. And often, when we've tried to have economists make gaming economies, they oversee the fact that first you have to create nature. There's a good quote from Carl Sagan, which is kind of, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, well, first you need to create the universe. Mm-hmm. And I often observe people just start to bake apple pie and think apple pie is an economy. Well, that's not an economy from scratch. It's just an apple pie. It's not a sustainable economy. You have to first create the universe. And creating universes is super hard. So when I talk to Web3 teams, Web2 teams, whatever they're called, or even governments, there's a lot of learning that people need to do in organizing their thought into these stacks, understand each problem domain, not cheat between the layers, and building this up like a layer cake instead of just cheating and building an apple pie and selling it as an NFT.
Interesting. I guess one could argue Web3 exacerbates some of these issues with scaling economies, as capital can more freely come and go.
So I would challenge that. I've run an MMO for 20 years. Capital is coming and flowing to all MMOs all the time. It's just a terms of service violation. It's happening rapidly for all MMOs. There's nothing new that you have to design against real money trading. All MMOs have had to deal with this since dawn of time. It's just a terms of service violation. We try to regulate and fight it. It's still rapidly happening. You can usually find a shadow economy in all MMOs, which is equal to their annual revenue.
Yeah. So Ben or Aaron, how are you using this openness to your advantage as you build your games?
Could you repeat that?
How are you using this openness of Web3 to your advantage as you build your games?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, nothing has changed about building games. Like, you have to start with something that ultimately players find fun and compelling enough to return to the next day. And then layering this open economy, I'm not going to argue with literally like the subject matter expert in economic depth and breadth around the complexity of open versus closed. I think you're absolutely right. MMOs from the beginning have had this. It's just a terms of service violation. I think that's an interesting way of putting it. From my perspective, we have the same problem in Web3, which is managing these open economies. It is enormously challenging when a player can, without a terms of service violation, instantly exit or enter your economy, via crypto exchange, via OpenSea or Blur or one of the other NFT marketplaces. And then I think the really interesting thing, you talked about governments. The idea that we have a social network of players who are actually owners, asset holders in our economy. We're one of the few projects that has true governance, and that we let our players vote on features as well as meta changes and things of that nature. And it calls out one thing you said, which is like most of the time game developers play God. What I'm very interested in is how do we let the token holders play God? Our experience in Web 2 was mobile 4X strategy games, again, heavily inspired by Eve. Ultimately, though, players would spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in those titles and never have any control over the sandbox. And that's something that I'm really fascinated by, like the idea that you can take a governance token, an open economy, all around a series of game loops and allow your player community to actually influence the direction of a game and an IP at a tangible level, at a level that has real-world trade-offs and real-world consequences. And what happens in a world in which players truly have ownership and can, through that ownership, influence an IP that they know and love. And so that's one of the reasons that I'm fascinated by the Web3 space generally, despite the enormous and extreme difficulty that is building on the frontier.
Yeah, the openness of the economy, it's very interesting because you can make a single player game, and if your assets are NFTs that are freely tradable, you've made an MMO. It doesn't really matter how you're approaching it. You now have an economy that people are going to be building other systems around. So the openness also makes you rethink the sort of things that you would normally give your players, right? Like you can't think of a traditionally ladder type hierarchy of assets because now you have a pay for power sort of situation even in a free play game. So you have to think about, well, how can you possibly give the widest distribution of assets to the number of players that you have available without forcing some of them out because they don't have the money, or otherwise influencing the game such that people with certain assets get the best experience at the expense of others.
So you both mentioned assets and asset holders. Web3 definitely brings more stakeholders in the balance, whether it's gamers, investors, liquidity providers. Is there a way to design a game that satisfies all these stakeholders? Any views on this? Is it important to pay justice to anyone else beyond gamers?
Yeah, I think speaking from our experience over the past 4.5 years, you kind of discover pockets of players or I guess stakeholders frequently that somehow you might have not necessarily missed, but you underestimate their influence and how they see the game and the role that they play in the like a broader economy or ecology of the entire ecosystem, right? Because it's like a living and breathing thing where if you make a mistake from the game developer perspective, right? Suddenly like, oh, why did you do that? Like now the entire guild system is messed up. Okay, well, they need to find a new product market fit. So there are definitely many stakeholders to consider. And I think one of the problems is in Web3 right now is that there are so many games that are being shipped or like they're shipping tokens and they're creating these stakeholders before they have the game development or before they have the systems in place to actually entertain those stakeholders in the longer term. So you get stakeholders who have expectations, and then the expectations can never be fulfilled. So you, as a game developer, end up creating like systems before the systems that are going to be live. So you're basically creating more homework for yourself by creating more stakeholders. So it's like a very difficult balance to strike because you need community, and stakeholders are community to an extent, but at the same time, you can't make too many, and you need to be very careful with the rollout strategy. So that's kind of advice that we're giving to partners that we're working at is like, try to avoid shipping a token too soon, try to have systems in place whenever you are shipping a token, or what does it mean to even have a token in the market? So, yeah.
Any other views?
So we have had throughout these 20 years several instances where people have asked investors invested in the economy of Eve. And we started to notice this quite early on. And we actually made a system, it's called the Plex system. It's been copied by many MMOs since, so that now you can, and it's not a terms of service violation, invest in the economy of Eve. You can bring money into the economy. It's actually a system inspired by cell phone minute economies in Africa, where people use cell phone minutes as a medium of exchange. Because there's a recourse to redemption, and we made a similar system. And immediately we saw people come in investing in the economy. The most famous example is somebody bought virtual currency for $1 million, recruited an army of 4,000 people and claimed to win EVE Online. Found out that it's very complicated to organize an army of 4,000 people with internet spaceships. It was fun and games for a few months, and then a person lost, but had the time of their lives. Obviously had the disposable income to drop $1 million on internet spaceships, provided a lot of content in the economy, and got tremendous value back. So the case of if you could make infrastructure investments in a virtual world and then exit as almost like a pension fund. Pension funds are a lot in infrastructure investment. If you could invest in building of infrastructure in EVE Online, I'm going to build a new superhighway through EVE Online. I'm going to have toll gates, and I'm going to recoup my investment over 10 years, which is not an unreasonable thing to do by now. I think overall that would be a good thing. We're obviously not set up for it, but we have seen the inklings of these things happening, even if we're not properly set up for it. So I think there's a desire to kind of enable these kind of use cases. Just like we invented this cell phone minute economy with the Plex system, if we were to able to find a way to do that in addition to EVE Online, I think we would enrich the experience and the number of kind of use cases of it even further.
Yeah, I think what we see in Axie is a lot of people, they become like micro entrepreneurs, right, in the ecosystem. So they want to basically build on top of the platform that you created. So EVE, Axie, like arguably are platforms for job seeking potentially, and I think it's super interesting to see that happen. And then it's like the job of the world creator, right, to make sure that, well, you can at least guide it in the right direction, but economy, like, it also dictates, like, not everyone is going to survive, right, in these markets that are open. So that from, I think we actually have discussed this in the past, like, it's quite brutal to see when, because these are real people, like, they lose their jobs inside the game, and it becomes like an entire story all of a sudden that's being built inside of these virtual worlds, right? So it's just super interesting to follow, and I just like the human ingenuity of how people want to create stuff and they see opportunity. It sometimes even goes beyond what we had imagined, right? How serious some of this stuff gets, right? And I can only imagine, like, if you had permadeath, as you kind of have it, not permadeath, but you have like spaceships being able to be destroyed, like that in itself like puts a massive pressure and like it becomes much more real immediately.
So I wanted to talk next about technology underlying all of this. Alex, with MAVIS and Axie, you've been pioneers in many ways of Web3 gaming. So you're kind of forced to build your own stack, from run-in to the decentralized exchange to essentially everything. I guess Ben and Aaron, you had the opportunity to kind of more handpick what technologies you're using. How has each of you used this as a tool to build a sustainable economy? Maybe I'll start with you, Alex, and then others.
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny, when it comes to BLOCKADE, for example, they started out same stage as us. We've gone through many of the similar problems, I would say. Like early 2018, there's always been promises, I think, of blockchains or providers that were going to solve the problems for game developers, right? It turns out that when you keep building, you realize that very few actually even know the problems that need to be solved. So oftentimes you find yourself having to go back and reevaluate the same problem. And a lot of game developers, actually, I was speaking to one yesterday, was coming to the same conclusion. We just have to make everything ourselves. And we just have to make the stack so that you can get this holistic user experience. You can deliver a product that ideally they can use the same wallet, they can use the same blockchain, they can just like, they want to play a normal game without even caring about anything. So I think that's really kind of where we're headed. And the way we saw it with MAVIS and Ronan, it's just, we realized how difficult it is to truly scale this economy and to truly scale the player base. If you think about, you want tens of millions or hundreds of millions of players, and if you're then sharing, blockchains with too many other applications at the same time, and this technology just doesn't scale, it's incredibly, it becomes a very bad user experience. So you kind of work from first principles. And at the end of the day, you kind of, come to the same conclusions, a lot of these different teams. But now you're kind of getting to the point where ideally the stack is starting to get built out. Because there are people who have gone through the same things, who are starting to solve the problems in a meaningful way. I can only speak for ourselves. I think we're getting there, but there's still things to build. But yeah, that's how we see the space.
Yeah, the economies of these games are approached very differently from a game designer point of view or from somebody who works specifically like tokenomics, right? Like the tokenomics, you're going to have an extremely calculated system. It's going to be very open. People are going to realize that. A game designer needs the freedom to be able to scale with their players and change things and nerf things and whatnot. And in the case of the investor who just wants to buy some assets and sit off to the side, that's kind of a terrible situation to be in, because either you know exactly what's going to happen and it doesn't scale with users very well in most cases, or you don't know what's going to happen, you buy some rare assets and then you get diluted as more players come in over time. So you kind of have to think about how you're going to be balancing that. I think we're seeing a lot of new companies coming up, like when NFTs started becoming popular last year, we saw a lot of people coming in, proposing games and building economies around a hard cap. And now all of a sudden you have speculation running rampant without a game associated with it. When you have games that are actually being built, you have a massive dilution of assets. When the Neon District MVP came out last year, we had millions of assets being minted immediately. You realize it's very different when you build an economy around, say, like Magic the Gathering's model, which you have a lot of common assets, but then you have a lot of, you have some rare assets. You expect the economy to be treated that way, but it's still very open. People are going to be minting more as more people come in. You wind up having, even though you have a free-to-play experience where everybody can collect whatever they need and then freely trade, that's kind of the economy that you want. You still have the problem where the technology doesn't really support the notion of I want to take 1,000 land and sell it for $5 at the local store. You can't really do that. So I think it's not only dealing with the economics of the situation, which makes it difficult for investors, you also have the players to consider, where you can't just take a traditional model that works really well in pen and paper and then try to translate that directly into the digital economy either, because you still have technical limitations too.
And for those...
So I can actually speak to the technical limitations, because EVE Online is actually the first game to be developed on top of a database. Back in the days, like the MMOs that precede EVE Online, they were all basically just server states running in memory and persisting onto flat files on the disks of the actual server. And I needed to sit on panels like this for the first 5 years to argue with people why you would use a database, because databases are pretty generic, they're super slow, and they're kind of pointless from many perspectives when you have the power of just persisting into a disk. And EVE, for context, does about 10,000 transactions per second, which is not big for a database today, but when we were doing this early 2000, it was massive. Like we were the biggest use case for Microsoft SQL Server. We're getting special builds from Microsoft because we're breaking like all the boundaries. We had to buy some military equipment from the US called a Larsen, which was like a SSD with a battery in it to kind of make it a thing, and it needed permission from the Pentagon to be imported to be used for EVE Online. So out of that became this need to protect the database, which is not unlike what people need to do with blockchains, because they're kind of super crappy when it comes to TPS, kind of like databases were 20 years ago. So we had to take a lot of advantage from topology of interaction, understanding of how the world interacts with itself, which is a little bit the sort of physics argument. In an EVE Online, a solar system over here and a solar system over here, they're not going to compose with each other. So you have to take awareness of that topology of the world and thus the interaction patterns. And you have to codify them top level down and then onto your database, whether it's a database or a blockchain. And what I've observed with a lot of Web3 developers, and especially people that come from DeFi, you don't really have understanding of the topology of interaction, because everything is kind of global memory flat state all the time. And you cannot build a meaningful experience in a virtual world sense without taking an unfair advantage of your understanding of the interaction patterns. And you have to understand them from the top down, not kind of from the bottom up. Otherwise, you won't really get anything to scale, whether it's a database or a blockchain.
So Hilmar, you've alluded to several parallels between Web3 and Web2 gaming. Certainly, as we think of sustainable economies, mass market adoption kind of comes into question, whether you're going social or kind of after core audience. For those building Web3 games, how have you thought about applying playbooks that have been successful in Web2, whether it's around free-to-play as a mode of monetization to app store distribution? Maybe Aaron, we'll ask you.
One thing I'm really fascinated by that I do think is an advantage of Web3 is I do not have Mark Zuckerberg between me and every customer or potential player. All of their behavioral data exists on chain for me to query, sort, and organize. And so, we're kind of on the eve of our first big marketing push. We're calling it the Great Corn Drop Unicorns. And we've been able to look at all of our competitors. We can identify wallets that are high LTV, which LTV is calculated a bit differently in Web3, given it can go negative, if player cohorts are extractive. And so it's very interesting. You can build scoring models. You can look at, again, their retention and their behavior data to identify target players. Very similarly to what I used to do on Facebook when I'd go and say, I want men and women 30 to 50 in the United States. We can even look at the centralized exchanges that they utilize to begin to geo-target them. And so, a lot of our initial efforts are what I consider direct-to-consumer or direct-to-wallet marketing campaigns, which again will analyze and optimize just like you would in Web2 in terms of the cohorts and things. And to me, the second layer is the Web2 to Web3 attribution, and then you get into the whole instant wallet spin-up, which there have been a number of projects now, including several built on like Gnosis Safe, that are allowing you to set up a wallet without needing to manage your recovery phrase. You can tie it to your Gmail, Twitter, or even Facebook login. Like things like that, I think will allow us to begin to target kind of non-Web3 native players, which I view as like the second phase of our marketing push. But with where we're at, we're obviously a lot smaller currently than Sky MAVIS and groups like the Sandbox and things. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us to grow just in Web3 kind of native consumers as a starting point.
Any other views?
Yeah, I mean, kind of goes back to what I just said, so in relation to building that entire stack, right? So everyone kind of comes to the conclusion of, okay, if we're actually going to ship this game to the masses, all right, these are the things that we need to do. Are there providers today that can provide this stuff? Probably not, so we're going to have to make attribution. We're going to have to combine all of these other amplitude or whichever different kind of engine you want to use. I mean, it definitely, when I'm hearing him speak, it's like, oh yeah, this sounds very familiar to some of the same problems that we've been working our way through. And I think it's just a matter of time until we get to the point where there are actually there are clear tools that other developers can just use very seamlessly, and then you can just target these users in a good way and do and kind of make the entire space bigger.
Conversely, Hilmar, do you see any scope for successful Web2 franchises to adopt Web3 Rails, whether it's for successful titles or for new pieces of content?
So most games are not really economies. If you take your typical free-to-play game, those are largely single-player unlock progression systems. They have no labor arbitrage, they have no labor specialization, they have no flexible organization at scale. They don't really have any attributes which are necessary to meet just the dictionary definition of what an economy is. So the reason why EVE Online is a bit unique, because EVE Online is truly within itself an open trading economy that has a lot of labor specialization, it has friction for labor mobility, it has a lot of flexible organization at scale, which creates all this economic activity that makes it sustained for decades. Most people who have tried to replicate that have not really been able to find out the formula for it, be it Web2 or Web3. We ourselves struggle with it massively. I mean, we've done ups and downs in the EVE economy throughout these 20 years, but we're getting incrementally better with each mistake we do. It's just super hard to create. So I don't really think, again, to my point, Web3 doesn't really make it easier or harder per se. It's just hard to begin with. And the success rate of people that have created digital economy is just super low. And I can well relate to it. It's just very hard to do. So if you approach it from that basis and you start to break down the problem separate from the technology and whether it's open or closed, then you just you need to do these kind of first principle analysis of each layer of the stack. You need to analyze that. You need to specialize in that. You need to hire people for it. You need to organize them into some corporate structure where they have incentives and all these things. And this is the highest form of human activity in a way, like whether it's running an economy for a country or for a video game. So it's like a Rachmaninoff of making a game. Is making an open economy, flexible labor organization system.
Right.
Yeah, I want to double down on that because I agree that there's really the only economies that will be sustainable, Web3 or Web2, are MMOs. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's one of the reasons, like, for me, the principles are extreme economic depth and breadth that forces players to specialize so they can't do everything. And, we baked a off-chain automated market maker, which is kind of the center of our farm sim, where players buy and sell commodities with each other, right? So if you've produced a certain commodity, you send a unicorn to market, it gets sold, another player comes to that market and buys it. So there's a lot of liquidity in that market, and it becomes a system that in some ways can self-regulate, and then we act as the government, the central bank, in trying to maintain that over time. And we just shipped a feature, the questing system, which is giving us additional kind of tools in that toolbox to help further control that system. But it is certainly the most challenging thing I've ever done, and it is very, very, very complicated. So one thing I do with game devs that approach me for help is I generally try to discourage them from entering this space as a starting point. Because it's infinite pain and anguish as you attempt to manage a community of global players.
I think as a tag on to I know we're kind of running out of time here, but I think all NFT games by nature are MMOs actually, because from the second that you ship your NFT, the timeline is starting, right? So you would have like people that come in early, they interact with the NFTs in a specific way. Other people that come late might feel like they're missing out. Just like I'm sure in EVE, there's this constant, time is going, people come in later, they feel like they are, if I only started out a little bit sooner, then I could have been like the king in the castle or whatever. It's the same in capitalism, right? I think that's something to consider a lot when it comes to how you're making the game economy.
Well, I think there are certain advantages in Web3 that most people and most companies have not recognized or taken advantage of yet, and that is the openness of the data and the openness of who owns what and what you can do. It was brought up earlier that, for example, you can identify your whales extremely easily and you can target them, and so can other companies. So not only do you have all of the data of the economies of other games that you can utilize and learn from, you can also know who you want to target to bring into your economy as well. Not only that, all the NFTs that you have that exist in an open blockchain, assuming that you're not using a closed, isolated blockchain for just one game, if you have all of the NFTs available to you, you can scaffold on top of that. You can build entry points for other players to come in based on the achievements that they've had in other experiences. So these are a lot of data entry points that developers, it's wonderful for developers, speaking as one, because you can build an entire game around other people's assets and other games and other companies, the things they have done. You can build something totally new, and you can bring them over to you and then actually introduce something new.
Great. Well, with pain, anguish, and lots of promise, we wrap a fascinating discussion around Web3 gaming sustainability. I believe we have time for one or two audience questions, if anyone would like to ask.
Different terms of service of Web2 and Web3 games, they seem to apply a different design space. Like The different terms of service of Web 2 and Web 3 games seems to imply different design space. How de facto are Web 2 persistent virtual world developers implicitly building according to the assumptions that are now explicitly laid out in Web 3?
Yeah, so the design space doesn't really change that much, even if the RMT behavior of MMOs is a terms of service violation. It still happens. You still have to design for it and against it. It's rapidly occurring, and our ability to enforce it is only so high. We're setting a terms of service for an MMO. We're not setting laws in countries, so there is no recourse really to fight people on it. So at some point, everyone just starts to regulate it, and it just becomes a part of the design space.
Yeah, I think a lot of game developers are trying to come over and apply economics that worked in a Web 2 scenario where you didn't have an open economy, and they're trying to apply those same principles in Web 3, and it doesn't always translate directly. So you do have to think more as an MMO designer than anything else.
I think the key issue, or well, in our terms of service, is a lot about like mitigating bot behavior, right? So we always try to, when we're designing the systems, we try to make sure that the human, like we want to incentivize humans to use the systems, because humans have like unlimited capacity to build, do things, spread the word. Everyone wants to be a part of a community where there are other humans, like being a part of a community which only you and bots, right? Network of bots is not as exciting. So that's why we spend a lot, like that's why we have very like clear limitations on that in our terms of service. But actually figuring out all those bots, it's probably the hardest problem, I think, in these games. And if you're not careful, right, then kind of the entire economies. But it's a game, they will be messed up. But in the end, that's the system designer's fault, in a sense, because the players, they're just using the rules that you have created, right? So if you have the ability to extract a lot of value, they will do it. And they will seek any kind of way to do it. So even if you have terms of service, right, it doesn't matter, because the laws of nature or the laws of the game, they make it possible. So it's really kind of a weird situation where terms of service, like they're not, like it's not enforceable if the laws of physics are like different, right, kind of, in a sense.
Like, following from that then, sorry, de facto, what's the actual purpose of a Web 2 terms of service for you? Like, if it's always being contradicted in a predictive model, expects it to be contradicted.
So we are required to have it like that, because otherwise we're regulated like a money market. I mean, that is legit why it is like that. The whole concept of Web3 is that you're going to push the AML and KYC to the edges, to basically the exchanges, and then you have a safe harbor of like, these are not my things, these are not my toys, I'm just making a playground for toys that somebody else's own, and that's the premise that the whole ecosystem provides under, and thus the terms of service can presumably be different in some jurisdictions. The Web3 is largely a legal concept. Technology provides abdication of responsibility, but it's mainly a legal context. MMOs cannot be like that because we don't want to deal with KYC and AML. And thus we regulate the activities because we have to. Web3 lives in the bubble, which might be true or not. It remains to be seen that due to abdication of ownership, we now exist in a legal domain where we don't have to do AML and KYC, and it's just the exchanges that take care of that because they are the boundary controllers in the different economies. That is quote unquote the trick. So by these guys claiming not to own the things because users own them, they're saying we abdicate the responsibility of whatever is done with them. So that's why the terms of service are different.
All right, I think last question.
Can you guys hear me? Oh, hey. Hey, thanks for a very, informative discussion. So I actually have thought a lot about, what you guys just said about like the DAO and an open economy and why it is so hard. Actually, because, each of the game, in my opinion, it is like a small, or like of a new nation, So it's as hard, to run a new nation. It's like you guys are running like South Sudan or like Lebanon, right? Like very weak economy or like a new economy, right? And because of the marketing or like, you know, like the promise of like the open economy, right? So practically you guys have a really new economy, but everything is open. So there are a lot of actors that can like take advantage, you know, or like play the system. So the question is, right, you know, in order to counter that, you kind of need to become the governments of that economy, meaning that you need to impose new rules and laws all the time, right, to avoid bank runs, right? For example, like, you know, Axie avoid bank runs despite like one of the biggest hack, like the biggest hack back then, which is quite amazing. But at the same time, if you impose new rules or laws that you didn't impose before, you became the government, and your community, you know, will hate you too, because most governments are hated, right? So how do you think about that centralized aspect of an open economy in order to protect that economy? You know what I mean? All right, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give my quick perspective. Like, with crypto unicorns, we have a DAO, we have a governance token, we let token holders actually vote on meaningful decisions. So we don't change the rules, our players do. And I take a progressive decentralization mantra to that respect, so I certainly have the right for another 18 months or so, depending on how much RBW remains staked, to kind of control the DAO if necessary. And to date, we have not had to do that, because you'll find when players have ownership in a thing, in an IP, in these assets that they share as a community, they're generally not going to make decisions that are going to destroy those assets or the value of those assets. So there's something very powerful about that, I think. But again, you know, to your point, everything we ship is into a very adversarial environment. If we create a design flaw that is exploitable, or there's a technical flaw that is exploitable, it will be exploited. You know, welcome to the dark forest of Web3 game development.
So I can speak from a small country perspective, because I am from the country of Iceland, which has 300,000 people living in a tiny island in the North Atlantic. It's smaller than EVE Online, just for perspective. We probably have some record on having made a game that is bigger than our country or something. In 2008, during the liquidity party in the world, Iceland, who has its own currency called ISK, same as EVE Online. Our currency is more stable towards the dollar than the country currency of Iceland. Had the issue that people were arbitraging interest rate in Iceland against Japanese yen. And Japan is a big economy, Iceland is a tiny economy. So people were taking out yen loans and buying government bonds, and then later, when the bond market dried up, company bonds. So companies in Iceland were issuing new bonds that were taking loans in yens and living the interest rate arbitrage, because the Iceland economy thought it had a higher rate of growth in Japan, to some extent true, but largely inflated by the fact that people were pumping money into the system, to the point where the Icelandic banking system became 15 times the economy. It all came tumbling down, people went to jail, la 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 la, and we're all here still alive. But that is the physics of the situation. Like, whether you have a DAO or not, the DAO will have to operate against the physics of this. If this game has better yield than that game, and there is a mechanism to leverage one against each other, people will do that. And the people that live in that country or that game will suffer for it. It was kind of tough to be in Iceland running a company with no banking system. Believe me, you learn a lot about banking systems when you have to go to a Vostro account at JP Morgan to talk to the central bank. Can you execute the SQL query for me so I can pay our employees in China? It makes you want to make a blockchain to fix that whole mess. But to your point, you will be running a small country. You will be having a government for that country. That governance of that country will make mistakes. These were elected politicians that should have known better, but they didn't. They thought Iceland had invented a new economy model. It didn't, and it all came tumbling down. So this is the life you all will be living, and you should be reading about the Icelandic banking crisis more than anything else, because that's going to be your crisis in the future if you don't learn from that.